Hi, Greta. Thank you for accepting our offer and joining this podcast with us.
Thank you too. It's very nice to be here with you.
Yeah, I'm Lala.
And I'm Sevinch. Very lovely to meet you.
You too.
Yeah, and we are part of Feminist Peace Collective. It's an Azerbaijani feminist and, of course, peace and anti-war collective. But I think we are more than that. We are also very left-leaning collective, which is important for us to mention, I guess.
Yes. And also, just to mention that it's a collective that appeared after the Second Karabakh War in 2020 to address the issue of rising militarism, the war itself, and a patriarchy that is absolutely connected with the militarism in the region.
Yeah. So why we are here, of course, this is the COP29 in Azerbaijan.
Yeah. Today is the first day of the COP in Azerbaijan.
Yes, absolutely. And head of states are meeting tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken. And I think it will be an important message to them, probably, whatever we are discussing here, and to just raise some kind of awareness about the context in Azerbaijan and what are the problems that we as Azerbaijanis see. Yeah. So maybe you start with, I think the major argument that Azerbaijani side and also a lot of fossil fuel producing countries argue that, we should have a say at the table about climate discussions as well. So, maybe you can, what do you think about this argument?
Yeah. I mean, there's no doubt that everyone who is affected by this crisis and who's taking part in it should have a say. But there's a whole other thing with letting a completely fossil fuel dependent country like Azerbaijan getting to completely set the agenda on these negotiations and this conference. Azerbaijan's economy is 90% dependent on fossil fuels. It has no real ambition to take climate action. It is planning to expand fossil fuel production and exports. And I think they prove time and time again that their interest is not actually to take real climate action, but to continue maintaining their position in this. For example, a COP chief executive were caught trying to use his position in the COP to make fossil fuel deals, which I think is a very clear, concrete example of that they are not taking this seriously at all. Also that in combination with the extreme human rights abuses that the Azerbaijani regime are guilty of, just both in the sense of that they're trying to greenwash their horribly bad record on climate action, but also trying to greenwash their human rights violations and crimes against its own population and repression, but also its ethnic cleansing against Armenians. Mm-hmm. There are so many levels here that it's just such an extremely clear example of the hypocrisy of these systems, trying to let countries that are horrible human rights offenders and among the biggest climate villains set the agenda, trying to portray themselves as a fighter for human rights and climate action and peace. It is absolutely disgusting, I think, at least.
Yeah, thank you so much for this really very sharp analysis and very sharp message of greenwashing and peacewashing that Azerbaijan is really trying to sell. For instance, we see that it's not the first time that is happening. We see that the whole development of COP itself as a framework, as a conference that has led other authoritarian regimes like Azerbaijan to host this. Similarly, doing these fossil fuel deals rather than the actual climate justice. And this complicity that already was allowed the previous years now has given a ground for Azerbaijan to basically continue this complicity to an extreme, perhaps, to such an extreme that now, as you mentioned, human rights abuses or the oppression that Azerbaijani people face in Azerbaijan is not addressed on an international level. And contrary, Azerbaijan is receiving a lot of positive attention and more deals and more engagement in the international politics. So how would you in general describe it in relation with the global politics that we see now, this rise of authoritarianism, and in connection with the states like Azerbaijan, in a small Caucasus state which acts like a middle power? So do you see the links of this complicity of the global powers with the regimes like Azerbaijan, and do you think it has changed over these years in your view or in your observation?
I mean, as we are all well aware of, unfortunately, the rise of authoritarianism, militarization, and oppression is happening all over the world, not the least in Azerbaijan, but the whole Caucasus region. For example, I'm gonna attend a protest where there will be Azerbaijani, Armenian, and Georgian activists coming together, showing solidarity across this region, fighting for their democracy and freedom and justice, and against this rise of authoritarianism and militarization, because of course the same systems that are oppressing people in Azerbaijan is the same systems that are causing the climate crisis, and of course we cannot pick and choose which struggles we're gonna stand by and which people's liberation we're gonna support. But if we're talking about climate justice and human rights, we need to be talking about everyone's justice and human rights. As an Azerbaijani activist, how does it make you feel to once again the international community is legitimizing the Azerbaijani regime and its treatment of its own citizens?
We are used to this because it's not the first time this is happening. It's happening already for so many years, with all this complicity, buying this oil and gas from Azerbaijan, and just turning a blind eye on everything that's happening, and sometimes issuing statements like, we are concerned about the human rights in Azerbaijan. Well, thank you. We are not stupid. We understand how complicit is at least EU in this, and with being the number one buyer of Azerbaijani oil and gas. So we understand why this regime is standing on their feet. So I think we don't have illusions about that, and we don't have with that, I think at least Azerbaijani activists clearly not illusioned. And this situation, maybe you can add also, it's also very complex, because there is a lot of people in exile already, a lot of people in country who are in prison, and yes, it's a really complicated situation for all of us.
Yeah, I agree. And like geopolitical looking, as you already mentioned, the Caucasus region is really in this in-betweenness. The whole history has shown how this in-betweenness has affected people's life, always being in this liminality, always choosing between empires, always choosing between the investors. And in this case, Azerbaijan specifically, because it's a rentier state, which big part of its economy is run through this fossil fuels, has given a rise to this authoritarian leader who runs the economy and uses his whole power around the fossil fuels. And we also see it through the resistance as well. For instance, I want to mention the third resistance, which happened in a village in Azerbaijan last year, specifically because of a company called Anglo-Asian Mining Company, who has its mining areas there, which is devastating the nature, water there. It was really just about the survival. And for these people, when they started protesting, the elderly people, just ordinary citizens, they faced an enormous amount of oppression, the police violence, and in the end, now in their village, they still have the police checkpoint, where if you go in and out, you're surveilled, you're checked. So that's how Azerbaijani government deals with the actual environmental issue. And it was even beyond the environmental issue. It was basically about the survival of these people and their nature, of course. So we see how Azerbaijani regime silences its people on and on, and the companies like Anglo-Asian company, which is for instance related with the UK, of course will not comment on it, and the best case scenario, as Lala mentioned, will just say, oh, we are concerned to some extent, but in this case they were not even concerned at all. And what do these people, these ordinary people, would expect from, let's say, international community, at least during the COP, when all of these people are there demanding this village to be freed from this blockade? And speaking of blockade, it wasn't the first time Azerbaijan is doing this blockade of its own citizens. It happened before in another village called Nardaran. It also recently happened with Armenian people in Karabakh, when they blockaded the people there for 9 months and starved them and completely devastated the region.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think from periphery of the metropoles, let's say, or the global world, it's really better seen the situation and the link between the capitalist exploitation, the climate exploitation, the authoritarian political exploitation, and you understand how much they are connected and how much they intersect. And as you already mentioned, that yes, we cannot just stand with one issue and abandon the another one and say that we are just in our judgments, or we are just in our demands. Unfortunately, we are all in this together, and
As you say, the international complicity is really disgraceful. Trying to say that they support human rights and that they are progressive, while also importing, for example, a lot of Azerbaijani fossil fuels, and the EU is planning to double its import of Azerbaijani fossil fuels by 2027. And by doing so, they are, of course, legitimizing the actions and the crimes and the human rights abuses of the Azerbaijani state. But it's not convenient for them to stop doing that, because that's how it works. They can say one thing and then do another thing, and not be held accountable for it, because people don't know of what's going on. So they get away with it way too much, which is really, really concerning.
Yeah. And then when you have Russia,
just a very small thing, and Azerbaijan is perfectly, I think, manipulating the discourse by appropriating very actually left the language of the that was used discursively by the left, like decolonizing, for example. A lot of people like approaching me from France, for example, and saying that, wow, there is like Azerbaijan helping Kanaki native people in New Caledonia in their resistance, and yes, and France is empire, and we are condemning that. And like, well, wait a second. Well, let's not be that naive in this in this thing. We should also recognize how this is appropriation of the decolonizing discourse and language, which is also happening in COP. As I think Azerbaijan doesn't really care what's happening with Kanaki people, and what kind of a backlash and police violence and oppression came on Kanaki people after these things happened again. I mean, they were of course experiencing it before as well, but
there's something more to it. So now what Azerbaijani government is doing, they have created this climate action fund, which is an initiation coming from Azerbaijan. It's a $1 billion fund that they want lots of other investors to invest in, so that they can help these developing countries. That's how they frame it, as if Azerbaijan isn't a developing country, as if Azerbaijan isn't a global south country. They are trying to do this south-south solidarity through investing in a weaker states or in a developing states through this climate action fund, which is very similar to a lot of Western agendas, in terms of tactics and strategies. And this climate action fund has a specific goal of doing this transition from fossil fuels to the green energy in that specific country. Sounds familiar, I think, right? The strategy. So how is the reaction, do you think, of all of this different international actors specifically to this climate action? Do you think they will legitimize it? Do you think they will give it more power? Or do you think they will criticize it? Any thoughts around it? What do you think?
I mean, I think it is absolutely crucial that we try to point this out, that this is not real solidarity. This is appropriated language, and Azerbaijan trying to portray themselves as basically using greenwashing in order to make themselves look better and to greenwash their own horrific actions. They're appropriating language of, as you say, the decolonizing terminology and climate activism. For example, they staged an environmental protest in order to establish a humanitarian blockade, which is absolutely horrendous, and it's just, you don't think it's real when you actually hear about it because it's so immoral. And also shows a big contrast to how they treated actual protesters who were trying to defend their community against the gold mine, where they were met with very harsh repression and police violence, which just shows that they're using these cases and these issues in their own advantage, for greenwashing and whitewashing, and desperately trying to portray this image that that they are a country that stands up for human rights, for climate, and for decolonization, and for the South. So, I mean, I don't know. The only thing that we can do is to try to really call out this behavior and try to portray the reality, and to hear from people who see through it, Azerbaijani citizens who knows about the situation and who are not going to fall for those lies.
Yeah, and thank you for mentioning the blockade and the whole situation that's going on with Armenia and starts from 2020 with the war. So Aliyev is not only appropriating the global left discourse, it's also appropriating the grievances of Azerbaijani people, manipulating and playing on their traumas from the war in the 90s. And this is a very huge conflict that had a long history, but we as Azerbaijanis, I think, not only us, but a significant group of young people tried to voice and raise their voices when the war started, that we are actually against it. You are in more than 20 years in power, and you are the person who negotiated all the time at the tables. How come you are not accountable to people, and now you are taking everyone to the war to vote? It's
and also the war that is perpetual, the war that seems not to end, even though they talk about peace so passionately, especially these days before the COP. One of the agendas of the COP was this COP for peace, or peace COP, something like that. And I think there was a lot of expectation before, like many months before COP, that there will be some sort of peace agreement to be signed in COP. That was an advertisement for a long time. But what we saw over the course of the several months, how this COP for peace was another form of hypocrisy, as the negotiations is really proves itself to be quite not successful, and in general, this perpetual violence that we see in our region and insecurities that are continuous, specifically in this case, in this power relations, is very much vulnerable for Armenian population. We feel like any voice that tries to bring it up from Azerbaijan or globally does not face this enough attention. And on the other hand, for instance, a person who has been against the war and has been in communication with their Armenian colleagues, they are being in prison, like Behrouz Samedov, who was recently put into prison, arrested for the treason, for just talking to Armenians, and it's a big part of hypocrisy when the government is talking about peace prior to COP, while imprisoning people who are doing something for peace. And peace becomes a crime, while the peace that they want is actually war. So, and we see this also, it's also connected to the global, I think, the perpetual violence that we see globally, like in Gaza and Ukraine. And you have been very active in this, so would like to hear your opinion. How do you see the connection between the climate injustice and this global perpetual war that we see nowadays emerging and even increasing?
Yeah, I mean, I think you summarized it very well as also, but of course, when we talk about climate justice, we are not just talking about, we want to preserve the climate and protect the environment, but we're also talking about we want to protect people and we want to protect peace, and to make sure that everyone enjoys the freedom and justice on the same terms. When now countries are both waging war against nature, but they're also, not the least, waging war against humans and entire communities, and groups of people. And these are, of course, completely incompatible, even if countries like Azerbaijan are trying to use green colonialism, for example, establish a green energy zone on occupied land, which just shows the hypocrisy that they're actually not caring about that at all. They're just using it as an excuse to legitimize their own warfare and their own greed, and it's really, really horrific to see the increased trend of increased militarization. I mean, not only for climate reasons, because that the military is one of the main emitters of greenhouse gases and destroyer of nature, but again because it is destroying the very same values that we base the climate justice principle on, the care and protection of humans and human rights. For example, when it comes to Gaza and Azerbaijan, of course, there's a very clear link there too, because everything is interlinked as always. Like Azerbaijan is responsible for exporting 40% of Israel's annual oil consumption, and is therefore a completely fundamental part of maintaining the Israeli war machine, and also complicit in the genocide in Palestine, through the BTC pipeline, which goes through Georgia and Turkey, and that transports these fossil fuels to Israel, which is extreme hypocrisy, and shows that the liberation of all these oppressed and marginalized groups are, of course, very interlinked. It is the same regime, as we said, that are oppressing Azerbaijanis, Armenians, Palestinians, and many other groups as well, as you know.
Yeah.
More than me.
Yeah, unfortunately, and Israeli-Azerbaijani connections are getting stronger and stronger, and
Azerbaijan using Israeli weapons in their ethnic cleansing,
and also using Israeli technologies like Pegasus to stalk on their just politically active people in country. So
And one thing we didn't mention, I think Turkey was already mentioned. I think we didn't mention Russia.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about the connections there?
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah. I think we need to mention Russia's role in this larger geopolitics, which is really, especially after the invasion of Ukraine, has created this cloud in the global politics and also in the region, where everything seems blurry behind these clouds, because now we don't know the distinction between peace and war. Now we don't know the distinction between justice and injustice. Everything seems quite blurry. Of course, it's connected with the international complicity as well, but Russia's role is very, very specific in increasing authoritarianism in the region, which now we see is affecting Georgia a lot, and also gives so much power to countries like Azerbaijan, which is very much in connection and in coordination with Russia in developing their authoritarian tools and implementing it, and also becoming a transit for the Russian fossil fuels or Russian resources that might go through this region, from the Caucasus region. So we see the region becoming more and more reshaping itself through this ruling elite who is trying to create new forms of extractions, find new forms of extractions, and also make this space, this geopolitical space or geoeconomic space, a transit. And through that transit, Russia is really, really interested. We see the Russia's come back here, and it's a very dangerous trend, which might end up the whole region to go back, including Armenia in this case, because Armenia is in this fragile state, to go back to the orbit of Russia, to put it in a very brief way. Yeah.
And unfortunately, it's like we are presented with a choice of West or Russia, which is a very false dilemma and dichotomy for me, because they are both empires. I think there is a very misleading conception in the both left and right wing globally that Russia is some kind of alternative. It's not. I think for people from post-Soviet periphery who were from long silenced, and I think we are trying to speak up now, it is an empire, and we should acknowledge that. And this periphery suffers from that, including Caucasus, Eastern Europe, and Central Asia. And yeah, whatever alternative Russia might bring, unfortunately now it's a bleak and very dark alternative to this very, very strong authoritarianism state where you don't have any space for political action or...
We cannot choose between two evils.
Exactly.
It's we cannot oversimplify the situation like that.
Yes.
Yeah. I also wanted to ask you, I don't know if you want to talk about it, but I think people are very curious what you see as the future now with Trump being re-elected. What do you think that might change? It's a very complicated...
Very much.
Yeah.
It was expected, for sure, with the decline of the liberal hegemony as we see. The alternative is this new authoritarians.
Yes.
Of course, once Trump was elected first time, it was already clear where this global politics is going, since US has always acted like a unipolar center of the world or the hegemonic power. And since then, since the decline of this liberal hegemonic power, we see the comeback of neo-authoritarians in a very brutal, very harsh way, precisely through legal frameworks. First of all, I think this is what we have to expect also for our. We already have seen it in our region, how anti-LGBT laws, anti-LGBT laws, and anti-gender laws have been implemented. Foreign agents law have been pushed forward, and so on. So this is partly a part of the agenda of control, but agenda of this new authoritarians to criminalize certain identities, to increase the injustices, to increase the dependencies, and also to increase the insecurities, essentially. Because what Trump is trying to sell to the world and to the American people is this imaginary threat that he's going to save Americans from, and on top of the world from. So these imaginary threats are also resembling itself in this region, when we see the neo-authoritarians' biggest niche these days is that they all want peace. They all want to have this balance of the cracking world order. So I think what we can expect from it is that authoritarians and in their neo-authoritarian bloc will get stronger and stronger, and the far right is going to become way much powerful than they are already getting powerful, but the danger is that it will be way much more powerful than what we see now.
Yeah, I agree. I also don't expect anything good, to be honest. And the rhetoric that also I think Trump appropriates, like I am bringing peace, pardon my language, absolute bullshit. He's not gonna bring any peace. I think it will make the world even more turbulent with everything, to be honest. And a lot of fascists around the world will just gain a lot of power and of course support, because the bastion of liberty as democracy, as the United States like to put itself, which I personally don't believe in, of course, but it's not there anymore, and it's very interesting what will follow after this. And it's not also going back to old Cold Era world. There is no red bloc. There is, to be honest, a very open ganging against liberals. But unfortunately, I'm also not a fan of liberalism. Unfortunately, it's a right-wing ganging, and the marginal people, like queer people, the people who don't have strong social economic positions, and the migrants, in the West, Muslims, and in certain contexts, of course, Jews, this anti-Semitism will always be on the rise, and yes, they will suffer from it. We will see we will bear the consequences of this old school fascism.
No, I mean, I think it's very obvious that the current hegemonic systems, whether they are political or economic, both, are not working in people's favor. And of course, people then are going to want an alternative. And since it seems like almost all the current alternative movements to that are being demonized and oppressed and silenced. So then, of course, people are who want an alternative are increasingly going to go to fascism because
Yes.
that's the only alternative as they see, which is incredibly worrying, especially with when the climate crisis is going to continue to escalate, going to cause increased instability in the world, and with that movement, I'm really, really worried about
Yes.
people going to become even more xenophobic and going to close their borders, leaving people to die, because that's their way of protecting themselves.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not bright.
It's not right.
Yeah, future seems very dark.
Yeah.
Yet maybe we can
Finish on a good
on
note.
yes, on a good
Yeah.
note.
There are those as well.
Yes, there are those like small struggles
Mhm.
which are continuous in different parts of the world.
Yes.
Maybe we are not very well coordinated, but the fact that now we are talking to you, I think this is part of this connection, this intersectionality, and as well as this necessity that we feel of connectiveness.
Yeah.
We cannot fully call it internationalism at this point, but what we can call it is reconnection and necessity for reconnection or connection. And how do you see the future of on a positive note, on a hopeful note, the intersectional connection and solidarity of different social movements, maybe not necessarily focusing on climate justice, but also incorporating it in their actions?
I mean, climate justice is only one of many parts of the puzzle of the future that we have to build. Climate justice, at least according to me, encompasses all other types of justice as well, because when we say climate justice, of course, that needs to include justice for everyone. And I don't think anyone can claim to care about the climate crisis or climate justice without also connecting it to the struggles of marginalized groups today. Climate justice is not just about a faraway, distant threat that the climate crisis will be in the future. First of all, the climate crisis is here and has been here for a very long time and will continue to exacerbate other injustices and conflicts as well. But it is also about ultimately the principle of justice, as we've talked about throughout this discussion. And I think that more and more people are starting to see that. I do. Like during the time I have been activist, I have both become more and less hopeful at the same time. Less hopeful because I can see that the people in power are continuously letting the people down every chance they get, but more hopeful because I see that the real resistance is in grassroots movements, in activism, and in people organizing and understanding that the system is killing them too. We need to, I think we need to have that shared understanding in order to be strong enough to be able to defeat this system. And I think that the role that you are doing and what you are doing is a very inspiring case of that, showing what the future of the resistance looks like, where we make sure that no group, no fight is left behind, but that we include everyone. So thank you for that. I don't know if you want to also say something to finish this off in a positive note.
Yeah, maybe it's not internationalism, but it's grassroots internationalism. I think we were reading one article together, Hart's article. So he's calling it grassroots internationalism as the future of resistance. So maybe we are there and we're slowly going there. So maybe there is a hope at the end of the day.
With hope, with such certain negations, rejections that we do, and certain goals that we share together. As you mentioned, the justice that is incorporated in environment, in our climate, in ourselves, in our bodies, in our created, established territories of this nation states and beyond. And I think this is something that will develop on its own through learning from each other as well, and also in action. We will learn from each other through this action and through this resistance together. Yeah. Thank you so much.
As long as there is resistance, there is hope.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you, Greta.
Thank you too.